Neil Rackham, creator, author of Spin Selling. You say that entrepreneurs are basically bad at selling. Why?
The fundamental reason is an entrepreneur, almost by definition, has a deep enthusiasm for what they do. After all, it's usually the company is their creation and the products often are their own creation. And one of the things we know about selling, and we've known for nearly 40 years, is that the best selling isn't at all about your products and what you can offer. It's very much about the customers and their need. And entrepreneurs very often swamp the customer. After all, since the 1970s, research has shown that in a sales call, the more time the customer talks, the higher probability that the call will succeed. In my experience, entrepreneurs can't help themselves. When they get in front of a customer, they want to tell the customer the story. It can be a very compelling story. It just doesn't cause the customer to buy as well as if they focused on the customer, listened to what the customer's needs were, and worked from there.
So you're basically saying they don't listen.
I think many of them would challenge that. They'd say, oh, but I do listen. But the reality is they're listening very selectively. They're listening for how can I get in and start talking about what I can offer. When you study highly effective salespeople, one of the things you find is that highly effective salespeople talk about solutions, talk about what they could offer very late in the sales process. Less effective people can't wait to start talking about what they can do. And of course, entrepreneurs are impatient people. And often they'll jump in too quickly and start talking about answers. And the customer who's listening there doesn't link that answer to their needs. Because customers have to start with what they need and then move to what fulfills that need. They don't like starting with a product and trying to work backwards. And too many entrepreneurs say, we have this great thing, do you need it? And the answer they often get is, it is a great thing, but we don't need it.
And they have that passion and commitment to a product or service, and that's basically what they're trying to push.
I don't want to in any way suggest that passion is a bad thing. Controlled passion is what's such a good thing. And when it gets in the way of listening to the customer, focusing on the customer and the customer's need, that's when it hurts.
What would be your advice then, that they should bring in a sales team?
I think what often happens is the entrepreneur tries to do too much of the selling themselves. And when you look at successful entrepreneurs, there comes a point fairly early on when it's other people who are going out and generating customer business. Now, having said that, the entrepreneur always does have a role in sales. The more complex the sale, the more the senior person in the organization has to be there representing the organization on what it will offer. But the fundamentals of selling are often best left to someone else.
At the core of Spin Selling is that you should listen to the customer and add value wherever you can. How is selling changing nowadays, particularly at a time of recession?
Well, let's look specifically at how selling is changing, and then what the recession has added on top of that in terms of complexity. One of the ways in which selling is changing is the average customer no longer exists. What's happening is customers either want cheap, convenient, easy to do business with answers, or they want in-depth help. Now, the problem with in-depth help is it used to be that customers were fairly satisfied if you gave them a little bit of help because you were only charging them a little bit higher margin, and that model seemed to work for a long time. But what's happening is competitors are really smart, and this has been exaggerated by the recession, say, hey, the mousetrap is no longer enough to bring us business. Yes, we have produced a better mousetrap, but we've got 16 or 18 competitors who've also got a mousetrap. So what we have to do is create more value. And we create more value by adding to the mousetrap in terms of advice, in terms of customization, in terms of helping customers analyze their problems. And all of those things are costly and they take time. And what the winners are doing more and more is they're over-resourcing the opportunities they want to win. And that's put the bar up for everybody else. So it means that you can't half be in the consultative selling business because competitors are out-resourcing you. And one of the things which has become a major problem today, and the recession has made it even worse because the smart companies know what they're doing, is that the skill in selling is more about picking which opportunities to over-resource than almost anything else. That's become a major issue today.
What's the impact of the recession on selling? Are we seeing companies downsizing their sales teams?
Well, it's not a cutback as much as a realignment of their resources. See, one of the things that happens, I will guarantee you that as you and I sit here talking, all around us are salespeople out with customers, and the salespeople are worried. They're anxious. They're saying, I haven't got my pipeline of business at the moment. And so what do? They try and knock on more doors. They open up more opportunities. And what's happening is they're half selling to twice as many opportunities. The smart players say, which opportunities do we really want? Which ones will we win? Let's put twice the resources into those. So it's all about focus. And Phil Kotler has a nice way of saying it. He says, he quotes what he claims is a genuine Chinese proverb, that if you chase two monkeys, both will escape. And I think that's what's happening right now. In the recession, a lot of people are chasing two monkeys.
You mentioned Phil Kotler. You wrote an article with him in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago that looked at the two sides, marketing and sales, and saw that they were dysfunctional in many instances.
Yes, in fact, we called the article Ending the War Between Sales and Marketing. When you think about it, that's a bizarre thing. Because sales and marketing are the two functions that drive revenue. You have only two revenue-generating functions. And you'd expect they'd work fairly closely together. One of the things we found was over 70% of CEOs are dissatisfied with how their sales and marketing operations are working together. And there are reasons for that. One reason is they're different animals. Generally, a marketing person comes with an MBA, has formally learnt marketing and marketing tools and marketing techniques, tends to be more intellectual, more cerebral. The salesperson is still, in many areas, a fairly seat-of-the-pants individual. They often haven't had any great education or training. Their skill is working with individual customers. They're not good at data. They're not analytical. And when these two come together, they're very, very different animals, and they sometimes just don't communicate.
There's plenty of room for conflict between the two sides.
Yes, particularly, of course, what often happens is they're competing for the same budget. So the head of sales will say, look, for this marketing campaign that you want to put on, we could get 10 extra salespeople out on the street. Now, here's one of the other dilemmas. Marketing may be much more strategic, but in becoming more strategic, it's become less measurable. So I can tell you, if I put 10 more salespeople on the street, almost exactly what I'll expect in terms of increased revenue. Marketing has great difficulty in explaining what will come out of a marketing campaign that will be the equivalent of that.
But in a recession, you're likely to see companies cut back on marketing teams rather than their sales teams.
Yes, companies are shedding marketeers. In fact, in the US at the moment, it's not just junior marketing people who are going. The tenure of a chief marketing officer is something like 16 months at the moment on average. So there's a lot of turnover of marketing people. And also there's a great oversupply of marketing people. In the United States, there are 1,400 graduate level marketing programs in US universities and business schools. There's 40 sales programs, from which you might think that there's 1,400 marketing jobs for every sales job, but not at all true. So what's happened is marketing is not standing up too well to the hard times, and there's a lot of marketing people out there just looking for opportunity. Many of them, this is the good news, are moving into sales. And if I were looking at the sales of tomorrow and what skills you need, I think a marketing background is an excellent, fundamental qualification for getting into the sales area.
Are there areas of that HBR article that you'd like to update, or is the diagnostic tool still relevant today?
Yes, in that article we were mostly concerned with getting a dialogue between sales and marketing. So we put together a questionnaire to allow people to assess how integrated sales and marketing was in their companies. And that's been very widely used. In fact, there were more requests for reprints of that article than anything else that HBR had published in the 3 previous years. And I think it was mostly because it had a diagnostic tool in it that people found useful. But that got a dialogue going. It doesn't solve the problem. I think the thing which is interesting is, as selling is moving into 2 very distinct types of sale, the transactional sale, which tends to be a very low cost, standard product, customers self-select, they don't want salespeople, and the consultative sale, which is getting deeper and more complex and more sophisticated all the time. We understand the role of marketing in the transactional sale. Because after all, if you are trying to run a business where you're getting a lot of low-cost product out to a large customer base, the fundamental skills you need reside much more in marketing than in sales. A good brand is enormously helpful. Great advertising, it really helps. All of these things, databases, good collateral, the things that marketing traditionally produces are what drive the transactional sale. In fact, when Phil Kotler and I did a session for chief marketing officers at Kellogg last year, I did something rather naughty. I said, what are the competencies we need in the transactional sale? Where do they come from, sales or marketing? And most of the competencies, we all agreed, came from marketing. So I said, shouldn't marketing own transactional selling? And the majority of people put their hands up and said yes. And so I said, well, perhaps we should give you quotas, we should put you on commission. At the end of the year, if you don't perform, we should fire you. Can we take the vote again? Not so many hands up the second time. But quite seriously, in the transactional sale, the tools you need to drive the business largely come from marketing. And yet, very often, the transactional sale comes under sales, and there's an uneasiness there. We need to find a better way of bringing the marketing tools and marketing competencies to drive the kind of business where you have fairly standard products. Now, let's turn to the consultative sale. At the time I was writing the article, we were banging our heads together saying, well, what's the role of marketing in the consultative sale? And a pupil of Phil's, Anil Menon, himself an ex-professor of marketing, was now SVP of marketing globally for IBM. And he raised a very interesting question. He said, the nature of the consultative sale is you're creating the solution as you sell. So how do you market a product that's being created as you sell it? That's the dilemma for marketing in the consultative sale.
That's also a dilemma for entrepreneurs, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a major business dilemma, because we're moving away from the era of stock solutions, except in that commodity sense of a high-volume transactional business. If we're in the consultative sale where there's an awful lot of customization, we have to ask, well, what does marketing mean there? I think what it does mean is marketing has to provide tools to enable salespeople to create more customer value. And we've been experimenting with some of those tools, watching how successful companies work with things of that sort. I quote GE and IBM, both as very successful companies that are doing some quite interesting experimental work in terms of what's marketing roles in these large, complex consultative sales. But there is one role which I think is worth thinking about for, this is the dilemma for an entrepreneur or for anyone who's trying to run a successful business. I talked about the secret of success today in these large consultative sales is to choose which ones to over-resource. In IBM Global Services, for example, it costs $480,000 US to make a bid on a piece of business, whether they win it or whether they lose it. The issue is who chooses whether to pursue that piece of business. We can no longer let the salesperson make the choice. The decision's too big and too consequential. So this has become a new role for marketing. In companies like GE, they've worked on integrating sales and marketing in a sort of Six Sigma process of selecting which opportunities they're going to go after. We'll see more and more of that happening, because the real skill today in selling lies very much in picking the winners, deciding which opportunities we're going to go for, over-investing in them, focusing on them.
Neil Rackham, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.